All right, our last one is dealing with percent increase and decrease. So this is similar to what we were doing, but still a little different. So the percent increase, when they ask for that, we want to figure out the amount of the increase, so the change in the numbers over the original amount times 100%, and that will give us the percent increase as a percent. So let's check it out in action. Likewise, it does the same thing for decrease. And you can calculate this so it's positive or negative on decrease. It'll just be one sign or the other. And you just have to remember it's a decrease. It just depends on which way you do the subtraction. So the attendance at the Mercedes-Benz Run in Fort Lauderdale, Florida increased from 5,246 participants in 2012 to 6,820 in 2013. Determine the percent increase, round to the nearest percent. All right, so we are going, our original amount is the 5,246. So in our percent increase formula, that is the number we want on the bottom, because it's the percent increase from the first amount to the second amount. Now we're going to do the difference on top, the 6,820 minus 5,246. And then we will multiply by the 100 to convert this into a percentage. So if you were going to type it all at once, make sure you got parentheses around the top, and you can put it around the bottom, but it'll calculate it fine whether you put them there or not. So the difference is 1,574, and we're going to divide that by 5,246, and then we're going to multiply that by 100. We get 30.00, and then we get some numbers, but to the nearest percent, this is 30%. So that is a 30% increase in the number of people who attended, but the 6,820 is 130% of the 5,246. So the percent increase is, you had 100% and then you increased it by this much more. But if you're looking at just the two numbers and how much, what's the percentage of one to get to the other, it's 130% of the 5,246. So here it's very, very important to make sure you know which one the original is, because that one goes on the bottom. If you put the wrong one on the bottom, you're going to get the wrong answer, but you're going to feel like you do all the same amount of work. All right. So Nelson enjoys eating ice cream. He has recently noticed a decrease in the size of the container he always buys from 1.6 quarts to 1.35 quarts. How dare they? What was the percent decrease in the ice cream container? So percent decrease means our starting amount is larger than our finishing amount. So the original is the start. So that is going to be the 1.6. And now the change, I can either do it as 1.6 minus 1.35, and remember it's a decrease, or the final amount, 1.35 minus 1.6, would give this to us as, either way will work as long as you remember it's a decrease. So we could say if it's like, it's not 10, but if it was 10, we could say it's a 10% decrease, or it's a negative 10% increase. So like if you say the negative, you don't also say decrease because it's a double negative. But it's kind of weird to think about it that way. So usually we just go bigger minus smaller and then let the context of the problem tell us if it was an increase or a decrease. All right, so 1.6 minus 1.35 is 0.25. divided by 1.6 times 100, we get 15.625. They don't give us rounding directions, so we'll just say the whole thing. Percent decrease. It is in the question stem, but I prefer to reinforce that this one is a decrease. If you don't say that, a lot of people will make the assumption you're talking about an increase. And then our last one. Jasmine bought a house in 2005 for $250,000, $250,000. Lucky her. After the economic bubble of 2007, Jasmine's house was appraised at $170,000. Ouch. What is the percent decrease in the appraisal value of Jasmine's home? This doesn't actually mean it's worth that much. It just means if she tried to sell it in 2007, she wouldn't get as good a price as what she paid. But we can take the numbers and figure out the decrease. So the original is $250,000. And then we want to do the change between those. So 250,000 minus 170,000 times 100%. So 250,000 minus 170,000. So that's 80,000 divided by 250,000 times 100 is 32. So a 32% decrease. So it decreased by almost a third. Ouch. All right, so that is our last bit for all these percent equation things. But all of these, like a lot of them, can come back to is over of percent over 100. You just hear with the percent decrease, it's a little weird. That's the only one that it doesn't work as well because you're looking at a change instead of a raw number being a percentage of. All righty, catch y'all later.